Imagine you're building a new nation. Your people have just thrown off colonial chains, but behind the scenes, a foreign agency is picking your leaders, funding rival factions, flooding your society with misinformation, investing in businessmen who owe their loyalty to another capital half a globe away. This is not fiction. This is White Malice, the CIA and the Covert Recolonization of Africa by Susan Williams. When we talk about Africa's decolonization, we usually imagine flags being raised, anthems echoing across the sky, and leaders proclaiming independence. But behind these images of triumph, another story was unfolding, silent, methodical, and invisible, a story of spies and sabotage, of manipulation and betrayal, a story where the dream of freedom was quietly undermined by a foreign power, the United States of America. In her groundbreaking book, White Malice, British historian Susan Williams exposes the secret operations of the CIA in Africa, operations that aimed not just to influence, but to control the newly independent nations of the continent. This is that story. Welcome to White Malice, how the CIA sabotaged Africa's independence. After World War II, the world split in two, the United States and the Soviet Union. And at the center of their rivalry stood Africa, vast, newly awakening, and rich in the resources that powered modern civilization: uranium, copper, cobalt, diamonds, oil. For Washington, one fear dominated all others. If Africa turned socialist, the balance of global power would shift overnight. Instead of building genuine partnerships, the CIA chose covert control. Its agents infiltrated liberation movements, funded fake NGOs, planted stories in newspapers, and supported the most compliant leaders. As Susan Williams puts it, the CIA didn't simply want to shape African politics, it wanted to own it. In December 1958, Accra, Ghana became the beating heart of a new African awakening. Just a year after Ghana's independence, Kwame Nkrumah hosted the All-African People's Conference, a historic meeting that brought together over 300 delegates from 28 African territories, colonies, and liberation movements. This was not a gathering of governments, but of freedom fighters. Among the attendees were Patrice Lumumba from the Congo, Tom Mboya from Kenya, Frantz Fanon representing the FLN of Algeria, and future leaders from across the continent, men and women who would go on to shape the post-colonial era. The conference was organized by George Padmore, Nkrumah's close advisor and one of the architects of Pan-Africanism. Its goal was clear and radical: to coordinate the liberation of all African peoples, to reject both colonialism and neocolonialism, and to build a united front for continental freedom. It was in Accra that Lumumba and Nkrumah first met, two men from opposite sides of the continent who instantly recognized in each other a shared mission: not just independence, but total emancipation. The air was electric with hope. Nkrumah declared, "Our independence is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent." That conference marked the beginning of a coordinated Pan-African struggle, but it also marked the beginning of a new kind of fear in Western intelligence circles. Because for the first time, Africa was speaking, not in fragments, not as colonies, but as one voice. The Congo, 1960. Patrice Lumumba has just become Prime Minister of an independent Congo. His vision: unity, sovereignty, and control over Congo's immense resources. Williams documents that just weeks after Congo's independence, June 1960, U.S. officials deemed Lumumba a threat. Alan Dulles and others viewed him as too sympathetic to Soviet influence. An internal U.S. memo from July 1960 says, "Lumumba's removal must be an urgent and prime objective and should be a high priority of our covert actions." Among the plots, Sidney Gottlieb, head of CIA's Technical Services Division, prepared kits of poison to deliver to Leopoldville via Station Chief Larry Devlin. The idea was that Lumumba might be poisoned in a way resembling a natural death or disease. However, this plot was apparently never executed. The CIA supported Joseph Désiré Mobutu, who emerged as a key figure in overthrowing Lumumba. Mobutu was being cultivated by the CIA as someone amenable to American interests. Meanwhile, the CIA provided intelligence support to secessionists in Katanga and worked to discredit Lumumba's government. Williams references expense reports and travel logs showing CIA presence near Thysville prison, where Lumumba was held before being transferred to Katanga, where he and his allies were executed. These suggest active CIA complicity in the chain of custody that led to his death. Alongside physical plots, the CIA spread propaganda, forged letters, press campaigns, disinformation to portray Lumumba as irrational, communist, or under Soviet control. These efforts helped rally domestic and international opposition against him. As Susan Williams writes, the assassination of Patrice Lumumba was one of the founding crimes of Africa's covert recolonization. That crime sent a clear message across the continent. Independence would not be tolerated if it could not be controlled. While the Congo burned, another African nation had become a beacon of hope, Ghana, led by Kwame Nkrumah. From the time Ghana gained independence, 1957, Nkrumah was watched closely. U.S. officials considered his support for Pan-Africanism and his alignment with socialist policies worrying. For example, he declined to fully align with Western powers, and that raised suspicions. The CIA funded or otherwise worked with opposition parties, unions, media critical of Nkrumah. They circulated rumors, promoted internal distrust, and used preventive detention laws, which Nkrumah himself enacted to justify suppressing dissent, in effect giving plausible cover to critics. According to Williams, the CIA station in Accra under Howard T. Baines had ties with conspirators in the Ghanaian military. After President Nkrumah left Ghana on a state visit to China in February 1966, those conspirators executed a coup. Some evidence suggests the CIA had provided intelligence assistance or encouragement. There are very disturbing reports that some CIA operatives proposed more radical provocations, such as attacking the Chinese embassy in Accra with a disguised paramilitary group wearing blackface, presumably to justify further crackdown. These plans were reportedly rejected, but show how far plotting went. The coup was welcomed by many Western governments. By 1966, when a military coup overthrew him, U.S. officials celebrated. A declassified CIA memo reads, "Objective achieved. Ghana is back in the Western camp." The dream of Pan-African unity had been betrayed. Ghana's removal of Nkrumah was seen as restoring a government more pliant to Western strategic interests. Declassified diplomatic cables suggest U.S. displeasure with Nkrumah's policies, especially non-alignment, support for liberation movements, and criticism of Western influence in Africa. What makes White Malice extraordinary is that it reveals how the CIA's war in Africa wasn't just military, it was intellectual. The agency infiltrated African universities, publishing houses, and cultural organizations. Through institutions like the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations, it funded programs that shaped how Africans thought about their own future. The goal was simple: control the narrative. Williams exposes the Congress for Cultural Freedom, a front organization secretly bankrolled by the CIA. It sponsored African writers, journalists, and artists who promoted pro-Western ideas, while marginalizing revolutionary voices. As a result, while thinkers like Frantz Fanon, Aimé Césaire, and Cheikh Anta Diop were building a new intellectual foundation for Africa, others were quietly co-opted or silenced. This was not just a war for territory, it was a war for the African mind. The legacy of these operations is deep and enduring. They plunged nations into chaos, destroyed trust between people and their leaders, and installed a structure of dependency that still shapes the continent today. Regimes friendly to Western corporations thrived. Pan-African leaders were exiled, assassinated, or erased from history. Susan Williams calls it white malice, a calculated, patient, strategic kind of malice. It wasn't always violent, but it was relentless. And it turned the African independence project into a managed illusion. Today, the same logic continues, hidden not behind CIA operatives, but behind mining contracts, foreign bases, and media manipulation. 2025. Once again, Africa stands at the crossroads of global power. The United States, China, Russia, and Europe, all compete for influence, access, and control. The CIA no longer needs coups. It operates through cyber surveillance, proxy NGOs, and digital propaganda. The strategy hasn't changed, only the tools. Recent revelations about disinformation campaigns in West Africa and covert intelligence networks in African capitals show that white malice never really ended. It just evolved. To read White Malice is to understand that African freedom was never simply granted. It was fought for, stolen, and fought for again. But this book is not just a chronicle of betrayal. It's also a call to awareness. Because once you understand how the past was manipulated, you begin to reclaim your power to shape the future. As Susan Williams writes, the greatest act of resistance is remembrance. So we remember Lumumba, Nkrumah, Sankara, Cabral, and all those whose light was extinguished by the shadow of empire. We also remember that the new struggle for sovereignty will not be fought with guns, but with ideas, education, culture, and consciousness. As Lumumba once said, independence is not a destination, it is a constant struggle. White Malice is not just a book about history, it's a mirror. Because as long as Africa remains the object of other strategies, it cannot be truly free. And as long as Africans do not tell their own story, they will remain trapped in someone else's version of it. Perhaps the true revolution today is memory, the courage to look back clearly and refuse to forget. Truth is never comfortable, but it is the only thing that can set us free. And that, more than anything, is what those who wrote history in the shadows have always feared.